Hello, and thanks for stopping by. Just a short video today. With all this time we have just sitting around, I've been watching a lot of old radio restoration videos. And there's a lot of times I'll hear the comment when they're doing the old TRF sets or whatever that, A, it's only a TRF set, don't expect much. And B, it doesn't really have a volume control. It just has a resistor, a variable resistor in the antenna circuit and things like that or whatever. And I think what we really have to do is go back and take a look and, look at early radio and see what they had to work with. One thing to remember is that in the early 20s, all they had were triode tubes. There wasn't any, tetrodes and pentodes or anything like that. You had to do everything with the triode tube. So let's take a look and see how some of the different manufacturers took and went about doing it. Here's a picture of early mid-20s AC Dayton Model XL20 radio. And if you notice, the control that's labeled volume is actually controls the filament voltage to the first two RF amplifier tubes. How do you take and control the brightness of a light bulb? You vary the voltage to it. Well, they were just varying the emissions to take in vary, how much amplification they were getting. So if you had a strong station, you'd take and turn it down some. If you had a weak station, you'd crank it up more as you were tuning it in. And then after you got that up, then the control labeled clarity there, that controlled the filament voltage to the detector and the audio amplifier section. That's the way they did it, and that's the way it worked. Now, if we take and go on to the our next one here is an early Atwater Kent. And this, if you take a look, they did the same thing, where it says RF control rheostat. There, that controls the voltage to the first three triodes, which were the RF amplifier sections. So you combination of tuning the station in with the variable condensers, and then also varying the filament voltage for the amount of amplification you needed of the radio signal. And then the detector control, you use that to prevent distortion after you had the signal rectified. Because if you notice, there's the detector tube there is just another triode. What makes that different from the first three RF amp tubes or whatever is the little thing there labeled phone condenser. And what that did was, when it reached that stage, you'd take and short the basically the RF frequency to ground, and it would only let the audio go through. Now, moving on from there, this is where we took and started getting into where they moved it over to the antenna circuit. This is a little bit later Atwater Kent radio, and they realized that you could get more uniform signal if you kept the voltage constant on the tubes. So what do we do here then? We take and we limit the amount of signal coming in from the antenna. The volume control here took and fed half of the antenna coupling transformer, and that limited how much signal was coming from the antenna into the first RF tube. Our next picture here is an early model Crosley. Now, if you take a look at it, this looks like a really complex. You'd almost swear it was a Superheterodyne. You look at it closer and realize that this is just another TRF set. Volume control is solely limited by the volume control there between the antenna and ground. How much signal are you letting into the first 226 tube, and how much are you shorting to ground. Uh, Another interesting thing about this, if you notice, is look at that transformer. Uh, this one here, they needed to have three different filament voltages for the tubes. The 226s took 1.5 volts. The 227 was a 2.5 volt, and the 171 took and ran on 5 volts. You know, plus the separate 5 volt winding for the 80 tube for the rectifier. So I mean, that really massive transformer. And then you had three different B plus. Well, you had two B pluses in your bias voltage. You had 180 volts, 90 volts, and minus 40 volts. So a really crazy setup. And then finally, we get into the early. This is an early superheterodyne. This is a Crosley 124, and volume control here is done two ways. The volume control not only regulates how much of the antenna signal is shorted to ground, but it also takes and adjusts the screen voltage on the RF tube, the first tube there, which is the RF tube, and the third tube, which is the IF amplifier tube. So that would take and adjust, how much amplification you're getting in those two tubes by regulating the screen voltage. If you take a look, now we're into the tetrodes or whatever, they do a little higher amplification, so that's why you didn't need as many tubes in a row. And the middle tube here, the 24 tube, is our first chance of looking at how they were taking and working on making a mixer. You had, at the bottom here, you had a 27 tube, which was your oscillator, and that's connected to the cathode. So you have the cathode is oscillating at the local oscillator frequency, signal coming into the control grid of the 24 tube, and they were mixed and went out from there to the IF amplifier tube. So really it's just a case of them, this is what they had. How can we take and get the radio signals, demodulated and fed into a speaker where people can hear them? Just a little history, volume controls and how they were doing. Hope somebody finds this interesting. Thanks for stopping by. Have a good day.